Yes.
Right.
If you
So
hold the mic closer, it will be
yeah,
less.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Okay, sir.
Now is it
Thank you
okay?
so
Now
much.
is it okay? Yeah,
Yes,
is it
sir.
alright?
Yes.
So right. So as I was mentioning, sensory integration, sensory dysfunction. So it is where the brain has got some difficulty in receiving this information and finding it difficult to understand, interpret, and responding to the ongoing input. So when there is a trouble for the brain to receive and to interpret and to understand to respond for the information, then that particular difficulty we say the sensory integration difficulties or sensory integration disorder. All right. So otherwise, it is also called sensory integration disorder or dysfunction. I generally put this word as a sensory integration difficulty because it is not about the intellectual problem here with the children. It is about how you perceive the environment, how you understand your environment. So your perception and your understanding varies person to person. So I like to put this as a difficulty. Hence, I will be addressing the whole dysfunction or disorder in the new word called difficulties of our children. Okay. So sensory integration is a normal process. It's very much a developmental process. It starts right from the day one of the child, from the womb. As the child keeps maturing enough in terms of the brain maturation, right from the womb stage, and continuous almost to the end of the life. So that experience, that particular child experiences whatever it changes in its environment. It's all called a sensory integration. So it's a quite a normal. It's a there are neurological process of understanding your world. So it's called sensory integration. So this, as I was mentioning, the process of sensory learning or sensory stimulation starts right from infancy, right from the day one of the child, or much before, right from the day one, as the central nervous system starts developing in the brain. There, the process of neurobehavioral organization starts developing. Okay, so this is for our medical fraternity. We say it is an active area of development, right from the womb, how the sensory stimulation is being presented to the child, how the child is getting mature day by day as the child keeps growing. So that talks about the sensory inactive developmental theory. All right. So, okay, coming to our discussion. So, sensory processing problems are usually identified in children. So, it is not only identified in children, it is usually identified sometimes in adults also. So, it is common developmental conditions. It's a common developmental condition where we can see this sensory processing, ADD, autism spectrum disorder, or any type of such as a developmental disorder. Okay. So when I say it is commonly seen in children and also seen in adults, it is like this. You experience a different learning environment. So that makes the difference between you and the child. So what exactly happens when I talk about the sensory stimulation or sensory processing problem? So we receive the information, we perceive the information, correct? So how do we receive the information? We receive the information by through our eyes, through our ears, through our touch, through our movements, through our joints. So when we receive all the sensory inputs from all our sensory organs, these organs, these sensory organs perceive the input. These sensory organs perceive the information, what it receives through the eyes, through the ears, through the touch. Based on what it receives, based on what it perceives about that information, based on that, you try to respond for that particular information. That response, if it is appropriate, then our behavior is being acknowledged or appreciated by the people around us or by the environment. If that particular response, if the particular action of us, it is not socially acceptable by the environment, then that particular behavior or that particular response becomes maladaptive behavior. All right. So the whole sensory integration, you can put it very simple. When we receive the information, when we listen, the brain, when the brain receives the information, brain undergoes the process of perception. Brain undergoes the process of organizing, making an action plan, discriminating the stimulus from each other, and then responding in an appropriate way. If it is appropriate, if it is appreciated by you, it is a adaptive behavior. If it is not appreciated by you, it is a maladaptive behavior. All right. Okay. So what happens here? How do you receive the information? as I was mentioning about you receive the information, you perceive the information, the brain is receiving, perceiving. How do the brain receive? So we have afferent pathways and the efferent pathways. Right from the when you touch a particular object, so that particular object gives you the tactile information that is being carried by the skin receptor and it is being carried by the nerves through the spinal cord, through the anterior horn cells, and which is to the touch area of the brain. Once we,
Excuse me, sir. Indu
yeah,
here. Sir,
yeah,
there is lot of we are not able to hear your voice.
really,
Uh, yeah. Yeah, it's lot of information is there, but there is a lot of background noise or something like we are
but
not
but
able
but
to.
but but, but I'm completely staying in a separate room. Nothing, no.
I know, sir. I know. I can understand.
Right,
Can we
right.
cut out something like where we can use? I mean, yeah, because it's
Shall I?
unclear. Everyone are telling its voice is unclear. Even we are not hearing it properly.
Really? Okay. Well, I'll do one thing. I'll just come on my with my phone.
Uh, yes, sir. Anything is fine. Yeah. We will just try with that. And they are requesting for a slow speed also.
Okay, okay, right, right.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just go through my phone. Let's see. Okay.
Okay.
Why it is not much disturbance here? I mean,
It's
you
like a background sound is coming like wind, and we are not able to comprehend anything. He has switched
right.
off his fan, dear participant. Sir is already has done that. Yeah, they are telling lots of disturbance.
Oh, really? But nothing. I am in an AC room now. Nothing is everything is completely shut down. Right. Anyway, I'll come with the phone. 1 minute. 1 minute. I'll
Okay,
just
sir.
come with the phone.
Sure.
1 minute.
Dear participants, please bear with us as there is lot of disturbance, background disturbance. We are not able to continue with this. He'll log out with some other gadget and we will see. Please.
Okay, Dr. Indu, am I
Sir,
audible?
yes,
Can
now
you hear me
it's
now?
fine. If you take out from this one, you can exit from your laptop, I believe, sir.
One second.
Anyhow, yeah, this phone is fine, we think.
Okay, 1 second. I think 1 second. I'll just exit from the laptop.
Sir, one second. Participants, I think it's clear now for everyone. Yes, they are telling much better from phone, sir.
1 second. 1 second. I'll just go with my drive and I'll get back to the same. Yeah.
Fine, great, sir. That would be fine.
Huh? You want me to exit from the laptop now?
No, sir, it's fine. You can continue like whatever. Anyhow, you have muted that one. We don't have any issues. So the voice was
Okay,
not
okay.
clear.
Okay, now the voice is clear for you. There's no problem.
No, it's fine now.
Okay,
It's
all right.
fine.
Okay, shall we start?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay. It's okay.
Participants,
It's okay. I can,
one
yeah, no,
second.
no.
1 second, sir.
Yeah.
Participants, please, everyone, mute your video and audios. Please. Otherwise, it will save everybody's and like these problems will come again and again. Please. Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah. Right. So sorry for the disturbances. Right, there was some problem in my end. That's what it was been said. Okay. All right. So we'll go with this one. So as I was mentioning you, so we receive the information. The brain takes the information through different sensory organs. So the sensory organs which I meant is like you have eyes, you have ears, you have touch, and you have movement, joints, everything. So all these sensory organs gives the information to the brain. So the role of the brain here is to perceive this information. The role of the brain here is to perceive the information. When I talk about perception, it is how your brain is understanding, how it is making a meaning of it, how it is trying to discriminate, how it is trying to make an action plan. So when the brain undergoes all these steps of processing, this is what we say processing, and the brain is able to understand all these informations and then it gives the response for the information. Once the response is being given, if that response is socially acceptable, if the response is socially acceptable by you, by the environment, then that behavior is called adaptive behavior. If that particular response, if the brain is not understanding or brain is not able to perceive it right and gives the action or the response, if that response is not acceptable socially by you or the environment, that behavior is called maladaptive behavior. All right. So, when we receive all this information, how do the brain receive this information from touch? We have something called afferent neural pathways and the efferent neural pathways. So, what is afferent? The information which is being taken from the peripheral part of us. That is, when you touch, the skin receptors picks up the information and passes on to this afferent neurological pathway. That afferent neurological pathway goes via spinal cord and puts all the touch information into the touch area of the central nervous system, that is the brain. So once these informations are put into the brain organizes information, makes a sense of it. Okay, I have touched something very hot. I have touched something very coarse. I have touched something very cold or touched something very hard object. So when the brain makes the sense of what it touched, then it enables us to use it. If it is a very hot, don't use it very immediately. You use it when you are able to tolerate that temperature. So the moment when the brain receives these information through your afferent pathways, puts into the different parts, like we have a speech area in a different part of your brain. You have understanding area in different part of your brain. You have a behavioral part, which is in a different part of your brain. You have a vision that is in a different part of your brain. So when the information collectively is being taken to the brain and distributes in all these areas in the brain by this afferent pathways, and then the brain perceives it, brain understands it individually, step by step, and then it makes a meaning of it, then it produces the action. So this is the whole cycle of sensory processing understanding or a sensory processing skill. So when the behavior is accepted, it becomes an adaptive response. All right. So what happens? When a brain receives information and brain understands it and then brain makes a response, what happens there? So that leads to a good social interaction skill, a good motor skill development, a good focusing and attention, so that you can perform well in your academic related activities or a play behavior or a social learning. So when you receive, when the brain perceives it right and makes a proper response, then your interaction in the social environment will be appreciated, your motor skill development will become more mature and fine, and your focusing and attention ability will be much more better. Okay. What happens if there is a disruption, if there is a in this neurological pathway, there is any disruption in this loop? The loop is what? The reception of the input, the understanding of the input. When you put a common word called processing, after reception of the input, the brain undergoes understanding, organizing, and discrimination and making an action plan. These four steps are called processing ability. When there is a problem in this loop of reception or a processing and the response, then that behavior is called maladaptive behavior. And the behavior which may not be very much appreciated in the social field. So if the neurological process in this cycle is being disrupted, then the problem arises for everyone. Okay. In this disruption, where the neurological dysfunction happening, that particular disruption of the neurological pathway, we term in medical terminology as sensory disorders or a sensory dysfunction or a sensory processing disorder. All right. Okay. So this is a brief picture where you can see the sensory system. You have the basic five sensory systems. We have vision, hearing, touch, olfactory, that is the smell, and the taste. Apart from these five basic sensory systems, we have something called the hidden system. The hidden sensory system is two things. One is the vestibular, other one is the proprioception. Proprioception is what? The amount, the information which you are learning, the information which you are understanding through your joint, ligament, bone, that is called proprioception. The information where you understand about your movement, balance, and coordination, that is called vestibular. All right. So this is very, very important. And this proprioception, vestibular is the basic essence of all your other sensory motor skills. So vestibular talks about movement, balance, coordination, control. The proprioception talks about four important skills. One is the motor planning, other one is maintenance of a posture, other one is pressure exertion, other one is movement control. So when I talk about this pressure exertion, you might be wondering, what is this pressure exertion? Okay, I'll just give you a basic example. So when we have a cup of coffee, you try to have a cup of coffee from the porcelain cup, from a tumbler, from a plastic glass, from a glass tumbler, or a small UT tumbler where it crushes very fast. So in all these different objects or a different cup or different containers, your socially acceptable behavior is without crushing the bottle or without uh, spilling it onto you. If you have, then it is a socially acceptable behavior. One second, I think my screen is gone. One second, one second. Just hold on. All right. So in all these different objects in the different containers, your only aim is to the socially acceptable behavior is you don't crush the container so that the coffee doesn't spill on you. If it doesn't happen, then your behavior is appreciated. So how do you manage to apply pressure in a different containers? For a UT cup, you need to hold it very delicate. For a plastic, for a stainless steel cup, you need to give extra pressure holding it. So the variation of your pressure, the amount of pressure you apply for these different containers varies. So that makes your learning more appropriate. So that is called pressure exertion. Same thing you can see. When a child is not able to, child may be able to hold a pencil very well, but the child is not able to write it very clear. The impression is not so good enough to read. The information is not good enough for you to understand the legibility of it. So it becomes the impression is very light. It means the amount of pressure the child is exerting on the pencil is not adequate. All right. So same when you see a child who's doing too thick in writing, they tear the literally they tear the paper. It means the amount of pressure which is required for the pencil holding, it is too much to the pencil so that he tears the paper. So this is called pressure exertion. What is movement control in under proprioception? The movement control is that you are able to control the movement when you are doing an activity. Example, you are playing a cricket. So you have, I mean, a tennis. You have this forehand, you have the backhand, you have underarms, you have overhead hitting. So you are controlling your shoulder movement to exactly match or exactly reach the ball which is coming to you from all the directions. So this part is called movement control. All right. So motor planning is if you are subjected to do any new activity, you will do with your past experience. You are preparing, you are planning what exactly the steps involved in doing this particular activity. That is called motor planning activity. Maintaining a posture, that's a very important skill for you. A lot of you would have undergone this one. The child is not sitting in a place. The child constantly keeps running away. Child keeps constantly moving from place to place, always bumps onto the surface. These things are all problem with the proprioception, maintenance of a posture. What happens in this maintenance of a posture? If your proprioception skills are not adequate, then you keep on moving the joint. You keep on moving the posture. You don't maintain the posture very well. So this is called proprioception problem. Okay. So as I was mentioning, the five different senses and the hidden senses, which should be very much carefully observed, which should be carefully evaluated when you go to a therapist, when you say, okay, these are issues my child is undergoing. So you should be very much, knowledgeable in knowing what is the frequency of this behavior, what is the duration this thing comes, what is the intensity, how much is the intensity of this sensory problem which your child is undergoing. All right. Right. So this is a common slide which I ask everyone. Which many parents feel the sensory problem happens only to the children, where they have a problem with autism or attention deficit. Is that real? Do we have any sensory preferences as an adult? Do we have sensory preferences? We all have a sensory preference. We normal people, so called, we also have a sensory disturbances or a sensory preferences. The only difference what makes you normal and what other children, the children whom you are trying to brand them as an autism or attention deficit, the difference is that particular child, that particular child finds it difficult to overcome the sensory preference problem. Child finds it difficult to overcome the sensory problem. So the child sticks into that particular thing and you are mastering the art to overcome the sensory problem. So that is the only difference which I see where a child is having a sensory problem. You also have a sensory problem, but you are able to overcome it. All right. Okay. Right. So this is something, a common query. Most of the parents, I can say 98 to 99% of the parents, they want to know what is the sensory problem, what is behavior problem. There is a lot of confusion between a sensory problem and a behavior problem. Is it overlapping or is it a separate entity or how to deal with it? Lot of things. Probably in the coming slides, I will explain you what is this behavioral problem. Okay. Okay, all right. So what we understood, a sensory integration difficulty is a neurological difficulties or a neurological disorder. Neurological means there is a loopway, a pathway where the information is being taken, puts into the brain. Brain undergoes a certain processing steps. After undergoing the processing steps, the brain responds. The brain gives information back through the efferent pathway to the arms and to the legs and all to behave in a normal way. So if there is a disruption, there becomes a sensory integration difficulties or a disorder. So this is what I was trying to put it in a red manuscript. So the processing skills are receiving, organizing, utilizing the interpretation of one's environment, that is discrimination, and making the body to learn what exactly you're seeing, how you want it to do. And move. Move is what? Planning your how to execute the work. So action plan. After understanding the action plan, then you execute the function. Here I like to add on one more thing. Like when I talk about making an action plan. So for one question, you have 4 different answers possible answers can be given. So you need to select only one answer for that question, which is more appropriate, more suitable to that particular time, to that particular place. So that is called selecting an action plan. So for one question, you may have 4 different answers, but among the 4 different answers, you need to select one possible answer. That one possible answer you should select based on your previous learning. That is in the learning which happened in the past, during your school period or in the past. Based on that, you select a particular action plan and then you execute it. If a child has a difficulty in selecting a particular action plan, then child will have a confusion which answer I should select. There comes the confusion. In some other cases, what happens is, if you train a child, rather make the child learn, you are trained for, instead of 4 answers, you are making a child to train with only one answer. That child will repeatedly, monotonously learn or train only to that answer. If that answer is not given, if the same question, if a different answer if it is been presented, the child may not be in a position to select the appropriate answer. All right. So making an action plan is very important to execute it appropriately. All right. Okay. So the next one is when a sensory integration dysfunction symptoms appear. So when you see a child, when a child undergoes a certain odd behavior or a certain behavior which everyone complains that this behavior is not acceptable, then you should take the child to a proper professional where they understand your problem well, where they give you the cause for that particular behavior. Then only you will be able to present exactly what, then only you'll be able to present exactly to the occupational therapist what you need from the professional. Dr. Indu, is that okay everything? Is there any complaint again?
Hello, sir. All fine, sir. All
Everything is
fine.
fine?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Oh, okay, right. All right. So, based if you after seeing all this problem with your children, if you find anything you need to do it, you need to take to a proper knowledgeable professional where they can help you to figure out what exactly your child is undergoing. All right. Okay. In all these years, you had all come with different queries saying that you need to address the behavior. You have a problem with the sensory processing children. So have you ever wondered what exactly, how the brain might be looking for these children? What exactly is happening for them? Okay, if you see this picture, you will understand what exactly the condition will be the with the brain of a child with the sensory processing difficulties. So this is the common side where you can see in a major metropolitan cities, especially in Bangalore, you have a lot of traffic jam happens everywhere. So it is like this. One person in the signal, if every vehicle from all the directions they keep moving at one single road, there you end up in a big chaos. This chaos is because of you are not regulating the traffic. The vehicle from one side is not regulated. The traffic police is not working efficiently. We allowed every vehicle from all the directions to pass on to a different directions. When this happens, when there is no regulation here, the complete chaos. So next level, you won't reach your destination. This improper regulation happens even in our brain when information from all the sensory organs receives to the brain at one given time. If the brain is not able to regulate these informations properly, or if the brain is finding some difficulty in understanding or organizing these information, then all these informations will be jammed inside your brain. Because of this condition, because of this traffic jam kind of situation in your brain, the brain is not in a position to tell your body parts to respond in such a way. So the brain goes into shutdown. Understood? Shutdown is the word we should be using here. So it is called poor self-regulation of the central nervous system to make a meaningful organizing ability of an ongoing input. All right. Okay. So as I was mentioning, to make it more simple, what happens now? Now you are in this webinar. So you are bombarded with the auditory information of mind. I kept talking to you for the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes. You are able to receive this information. At the same time, you are able to look into or listen into the crying of a child, or your child might be calling you, or different situations, different inputs you'll be getting from your home environment. So you are successfully suppressing those information from the background so that you focus only to my auditory input, only to my lecture. So that is called sensory processing or sensory modulation. So when you are able to understand, you are able to organize, you are able to make an action plan by executing, focusing to my lecture, that is called sensory processing. When the disturbances happens in the background, you are suppressing it and focusing only on to my lecture, that is called sensory modulation. You are prioritizing for which you should be focusing, for which lecture you should concentrate. Imagine a situation where there is some emergency call in your home. You will suppress my information. You will take the information which is very much needed, emergency information is needed for you. So that shifting of your attention to two different tasks is called sensory modulation. All right. Okay. So this picture, which clearly, if you see this one and you understand, this is the whole picture talks about sensory integration. There is a sensory input from all your sensory organs. You are receiving the sensory input. Sensory, after receiving the sensory input, the brain undergoes the processing ability, where the brain, when I talk about processing, it is called understanding, organizing, discrimination, and making an action plan. So these four steps are called sensory processing. And after undergoing the processing, the brain tells you to respond. And then this vicious cycle is being strengthened by the feedback mechanism. Feedback is what? When the response is socially acceptable, you are rewarded for it. When this response is not socially acceptable by you, it is negatively reinforced. So this vicious cycle is very important for you to understand the whole sensory integration difficulties. All right. Okay. So I kept talking about child processing the information, sensory processing. Child has to understand, child has to organize, child has to discriminate. So which point the child should understand? What is the point the child should organize? Which point the child should make an action plan? So that point, technically, medically we term that as neurological threshold level. It is called sensory neurological threshold level. So what is the sensory neurological threshold level? So there is a point, we say threshold, if that threshold is triggered, then only your response happens. If the threshold is high or low, then the behavior is inappropriate. So we like to put this slide as, when there is an interaction between your threshold level, that is the point where your threshold is being triggered. Between that point, based on that point, what behavior you are showing makes your sensory processing skills mature or immature. Right? In the coming slides, you will understand what is neurological threshold level with the pictures and what exactly with the analogy. All right. So neurological threshold is just you understand only this one now. Neurological threshold is the point. There is a point in the neurological pathway. If that point is triggered, then you make a response. All right. If that response is acceptable behavior, then the neurological threshold is optimal or acceptable threshold. If the behavior is not acceptable, then the neurological threshold is inappropriate. Okay. So what happens here? The amount of stimulus, the amount of stimuli required for a nerve cell in a sensory system to respond is called neurological threshold. So I was just mentioning you, there is a point in the neurological pathway, that is in the nerve, that that particular point in the nerve pathway should be triggered. That is called neurological threshold. So normally we have three different types of, usually people take in a variety of information. Suppose a child requires too much of stimuli. Instead of calling, you would have undergone this one. You go to the therapist and say, your child is not responding for the name call. The therapist will ask you, out of 10 times, how many times you need to make a call for the child response? So out of 10 times, I need to call my child 7 times or 10 times. And out of 10 times, 3 times only child is responding. 7 times the child is not responding. It means that particular child wants more amount of stimuli to make a response. Response is name call response. That is called high stimuli or a high threshold, neurological threshold level. In some other situation, a child may require very little stimuli to respond. It means before the information is being completely presented to the child wants to react. Here child is not responding, child is reacting. So if a little bit of information goes also, it triggers the neurological threshold. Then child starts reacting for it. It means the child is highly sensitive. Child is highly sensitive and low neurological threshold. So we have two types of neurological threshold. One is high threshold, one is low threshold. High threshold where a child requires lot of stimuli to make a response. Whereas in a low threshold, little stimuli is enough for a child to respond. In both the situation, the behavior will become inappropriate. The behavior will become maladaptive because when child takes too much of stimuli, child loses registration capacity. Child not focusing on to the particular thing. Too much of over focusing will not help you in learning. That is called high stimuli. If it is a low, little stimuli child wants to make a response, it means before the information is being given, the child wants to react for it. It means the child is anxious, child is sensitivity to the stimuli, child is defensive mechanism, child shows defensive mode. So this is called neurological threshold. The relation between the neurological threshold and the behavior you see in the next slide. This slide on one. This common analogy I like to put in for everyone to make it more interesting and to make parents understand things very easily. It is like this. Imagine where you are, you're very much hungry. When you are very much hungry, what you do? You tend to eat a lot. In the sense, you keep on eating. Even then, your hunger is not being satisfied. Still, you keep on eating. Till you feel that completeness. All right. This is one scenario. The other scenario, after having a good feast, after having a good party, you are done with your meals, you're complete, you're full with your food. You don't have any place in your stomach to eat. All right. So imagine in this situation, if anyone tells you to eat extra one chapati or extra one idli or extra one dosa, what will be your response for it? When you're already full with your stomach, if anyone forces you to eat extra, you will scream at them. You will shout at them. You will say, I don't want. First, initially, you may say, I don't want. Suppose in case you are, you are full and anyone forces you again and again, you will shout at them. That is your behavior. Whereas, when you're hungry, you keep on eating more and more. If anyone stops you from that one, again, you become very upset. If someone tells you don't eat, you don't bother about them. You don't listen to them. So that is where your hungry stomach tells you. Suppose in case if you are okay, just right, you had half of the stomach, quarter of the stomach with water, quarter of the stomach only for the air. Then you will be very much all right. You will have a proper right food you might have had, so that will help you to sleep well, organize your physiological things very well, your behavioral status will be very well, you won't have any disturbance in all these things. The same way you see, as a hungry stomach, you have a hungry brain. As a stuffed full stomach, you have a stuffed full brain. Imagine when the brain is empty when a brain is hungry with the information, the brain seeks lot of information. The brain is in search of lot of stimuli. It runs for the information. So this is the scenario where you would have seen a children terming as sensory seeking, running place to place, not sitting in a place, keep on moving, keep on jumping. You will say he has got lot of energy. Trampoline, even for 1 hour they keep jumping. It means that child's brain is hungry. So child, they themselves are in search of food. They keep on running for the information and they satisfy their threshold level to make a response. The other scenario, when the brain is overflowing with the information, brain is complete with the information. In that situation, if you tell the child to write A, do this one, do that one, child becomes anxious, child becomes irritated, child becomes throwing stuffs at you, child becomes sensitive for it. So this is the analogy where you can see with the brain. If your brain is hungry, the behavior associated with that hungry brain, sensory seeking. So you seek more information where your outcome will be child is not responding to the name call. Child is not
listening to what you're saying. Child seems lethargic. Child seems lazy. All this behavior. If the brain is already full with the information, if you are trying to teach the something to the brain, then the behavior associated for the stuffed full brain will be avoidance. It's called sensory avoiding, or child becomes anxious behavior. Child starts throwing. So this is the link between the brain and the behavior. All right. So when I talk about the brain, you should relate that one to the neurological threshold level. Neurological threshold level is what? If it is a hungry brain, it means the threshold level is very high. If the stuffed full brain, the neurological threshold is very low. If the threshold level is very high, you require a lot of input so that the behavior becomes seeking behavior. The other behavior associated with the lazy, lethargic, not interested, that one. If the sensory threshold level is very low, it means little information is required for you to get reaction or burst out. That is called avoidance behavior. All right. Okay. So this picture, you can see this one. This is very important. So we made as a four quadrant. Only your problem, the child, every child can be put into this four quadrants. Apart from this four quadrants, nothing is sensory integration. Nothing is sensory processing difficulties. Only in these four quadrants you can try to understand the child. If the child is hungry, the first upper quarter, we say poor registration. Child will not be in a position to register the information which the child is undergoing in the world environment. All right. The other thing is, in a hungry brain, child is seeking lot of information. It's called sensory seeking child. When you have a overloaded information brain, you have sensitivity to the ongoing stimuli, and you are a avoiders basically. So in this, we try to again group them as under responsive child and the over responsive child, which you will understand in the next slides now. This is called hungry child. What happens hungry child? I told you, one is they are sensory seekers, other one is poor registration. When do you have sensory seeking? When do you have a poor registration problem? If you see a child, how do you know that? If a child over responds to sensory stimulation, it means they are running, they are jumping, constantly moving. That's called over response. They are called sensory seekers. They are called overactive. They have a flighty attention, in the sense their attention span will be very low. They keep on, the attention will be very feeble. They keep on moving their attention from different places. So that child is called sensory seeker child. They are hungry child, or they are over responsive child. And other quadrant is under responsive to the sensory information. When you see a child who's not at all bothered about the information, they're least bothered about what you tell them. So they are called a passive members. You would have come across this kind of children. They are passive. They're not at all interested. They always, you feel that they are daydreaming. They always want to lean on something. They always wanted to gaze something apart outside from the environment. You feel that they are not at all connected to your world. So it is called child with low response with the sensory seekers, or a hungry child. Hungry child is what? Where you have the threshold level at a very high level. All right. And you have a neurological threshold very low, where you require lot of information for a child to respond. If you give lot of information, if you give little information to the brain, very little information is enough for a child to react. So what happens if the child is over responsive? Child will be avoiders. Suddenly they will avoid their information. They don't like someone to come and hug them. They don't like to be in the group. They don't like to go to malls, temples, and social gatherings. So those children are called over responsive children for the sensory information. Okay. Again, a child with low threshold level, it means too much of less stimulation is enough for them to respond. If they are under responsive, if they don't want to respond, their behavior will be like they are brain shut. They doesn't like noises. They are very controlled. They are shut. A common terminology we use is called brain shutdown. They themselves put a wall across the environment, and they don't let others to come into their environment and disturb them. This is called low responsive child with the low threshold, neurological threshold level. All right. So now, as I told you, just wanted to brief you this one, sensory processing. Sensory processing is what? Four different skills. You receive the information, you understand the information, you organize the information, you discriminate the information, you make an action plan, and then you make a response. If the response is acceptable by you, it is socially acceptable behavior. If the response is not accepted by you, it is a maladaptive behavior. Which point do you make a response? That point is called neurological threshold level. If you respond, if the neurological threshold is very high, you mean lot of stimulation you want to make a response. There becomes your behavior lazy, lethargic, or sensory seekers, or a registration problem. If the threshold level is very, very low, where you require little information to make your sensory system to bombard, their child becomes anxious, nervous, defensive, avoiders. All right, right. Okay. So, does this sensory integration problem, is that going to affect your learning, or is it going to affect your behavior? I have seen lot of your queries for the question and answer sessions. It is more on behavior. But I have seen not even a single person asked what about the learning, whether the sensor integration is going to affect your learning. All right. So this is something very important. Sensory integration is going to affect the learning process. What is the learning process? Not only academic learning is a learning, social skill learning is also a learning, academic skill learning is also a learning, play behavior skill is also a learning. So, when you have a sensory integration difficulties, it is going to affect your academic, it is going to affect your social skills, it is going to affect your play behavior learning. Alright, so how it affects your learning? A simple example I will tell you from an academic point of view. Academic is what? You are in a classroom setup. In a classroom setup, if your proprioception skill is not good enough, your maintaining a posture will be affected. If your pressure exertion skill is not adequate in sensory integration skills, your writing skill will be affected. If you have a poor visual motor trouble, that is sensory is what? Visual. Motor is what? Writing something. So that visual motor is being affected, then the legibility of the handwriting will be affected here. Legibility, when I talk, it is overcrowding, overspacing of the letters, alignment of the letters, the shape and size of the letters is not formed properly. That is going to affect the legibility component of your handwriting. So, when you have a sensory integration problem, when you have a difficulty to understand how much of pressure you're going to apply onto the pencil, if that part you don't learn, then it is going to affect your handwriting. So, this is called sensory integration affects your learning skills. And then sensory integration affecting your behavior. So, I have explained what is behavior. Behavior is what? You have few behaviors. Two types of behaviors generally happens. One is your adaptive behavior and a maladaptive behavior. When you have a sensory integration problem, your behavior is maladaptive behavior. What is a sensory integration problem you are expecting with the child? The child either a high threshold problem or a low threshold sensory integration problem. In both these different levels, the behavior is affected. What behavior you are being shown? I'll show you this one. If the behavior is associated with hypersensitive. What is hypersensitive? They are very sensitive, where the low threshold here, neurological threshold is very low. Here they require little information to bombard the neurological system. Their problems, their behaviors will be defensive together. They fight for you, that is called defensive. They flight in the sense they run away, and then they are freezing. Freezing is what? Brain shutdown. Whatever you tell them, they end up in not responding for you. They go into the freezing mode. They never wanted to respond for you. So this is for a child, the behavior associated for a child with low neurological threshold. So this is called poor adaptive, maladaptive responses. So hyposensitive is what? Where child is less sensitive or the neurological threshold is very high, where you require lot of information for you to respond. The behavior will be sensory seekers. It means they are over focused, they are unaware, they are lazy, lethargic, and not interested in learning anything. This is the common behavior associated with children with low threshold and with high threshold level. All right. And to make it more to make it more precise of the behavior, you have two different types of behaviors associated with the children. One is active behavior, other one is the passive behavior. So, you see in this coming slide, I was mentioning you oversensitive, that is low threshold level. In the low threshold level, children exhibit, I told you, flight, fight, freeze. All right. In that, if a child is countering the ongoing input, that child will be active behavior child. So their behavior will be fighting child. They always, they won't let you do anything on them. They are defensive with their stuffed full brain. And if you are a passive child, if the behavior is passive to a child with low neurological threshold, they are anxious. They are very scary. They are always in the anxious mode. What will happen? Suddenly you tell them, you call their name in a very normal tone also, they will show a big anxiety. They give a sudden jerk in responding, reacting to it. So that is called passive behavior response. They are in accordance to the neurological threshold, they go. That is called passive behavior. In undersensitive child, where the neurological threshold is very, very high, where you require a lot of information to trigger the behavior, to respond, they have an active behavior like sensory seeking. They running, they keep on jumping, they keep on, spinning around. You see the spinning behavior. They keep on, moving towards the wall and scratching something, and always they enjoy tapping the table or an object so to get the pleasure of the sound. They are actively involved in countering the high threshold level. If they don't want to counter the high threshold level, they are called passive behavioral response. They seem to be pretending to be unaware. They seem to be lazy. They seem to be lethargic. They seem to be uninterested with your inputs. So this is what generally the behavior associated with this child. So all the behaviors are not sensory problem, but all sensory issues will have a behavioral outcome. This point you need to remember, like a mathematical formula you need to understand. All sensory issues will end up having a behavioral problem. But all behaviors are not based on sensory problem issues. Example, if a child wanted to avoid things or child wants to escape from learning anything, that child is not associated with the sensory problem. Rather, child has learned to take you for granted, understand you. When they show that behavior, you leave that child. So that qualified professional will be able to understand which is sensory, which is not sensory, where associated with the behavior of your child. So this is just a diagrammatic understanding for you what is meant by typical adaptive behavior. The green zone is called where the information optimal threshold level is being triggered, then the behavior is also maintained within the optimal level, which is considered to be the normal one or an adaptive one. If a child is highly responsive, it means child is low threshold level, low information is enough for them to trigger their response. They are highly responsive. It means always they are in an elated mood. So what occupational therapists will do in this condition is to make them calm, reduce their defensive mechanism, defensive mode, reduce their flight and freezing behavior, make them calm so that they can perform in the green level. Understood? And we have something called a low responsive child. Child is unaware, child is sensory seeking, child is lazy and lethargic. Too much of information is needed for the child to make them respond. It means they are always submissive. they're always slow, they're always very lazy in doing an action. So for these children, the occupational therapist will be planning the treatment to increase or elevate their mood by giving a fast and repetitive activities to maintain them in optimal level. So when we see a child, we have to understand whether the child is a high threshold or a low threshold. If it is a high threshold, work on the increasing their mood, elevate their response level. If you see a child with low threshold level, you need to calm them down. So this is the strategy as an occupational therapist we follow. So we have multiple signs and symptoms of all these behaviors associated with the sensory processing. As I was mentioning about sensory, when we keep talking about the sensory, just straight away you end up in understanding vision, auditory, olfactory, tactile, proprioception, and vestibular. Okay. So when I talk about sensory processing, visual processing, auditory processing, tactile processing, vestibular processing, proprioception processing. That is what your understanding should go. So what is visual processing? When the visual input reaches to your brain, the brain understands, the brain organizes, the brain interprets, the brain makes an action plan, and then you either perform with your motor part of your body to do the response, or you just do any other response for that ongoing visual input. Okay. Same applies for auditory. When the auditory information, like how you are listening to my lecture continuously for back to back 1 hour, so it means you are understanding, you are interpreting, you are organizing, making an action plan in accordance with accepting my lecture or not accepting my lecture. So that is what motor response. All right. So there are example. I'll tell you what happens in a tactile processing problem. When you see a child with a tactile processing issue, so that child will have a tactile defensive. If the child's threshold level is very low, then they have a problem with holding it. They are defensive. I told you, right? The behavior. So we put that term as a tactile defensive type. So what is the outcome of this tactile defensive? You see child not willing to hold any object within the hand. Child doesn't want to manipulate any object in the hand. Hello? Yeah. So the child doesn't hold anything within your hand. So this is called tactile defensive problem. And you have a hyposensitivity to touch, under responsive. In this, what the child they will do? They will try to manipulate an toy or an object too much within the hand. Because of manipulating too much, giving so much of pressure to understand what it is, then they don't try to. The example, if you try to give more pressure in holding a cup of coffee, if it is a UT cup, end up crushing the cup so that the coffee spills on you. So that behavior becomes bad. So it is the connection right from the time of understanding the information, organizing, processing, and then making a response. Response can be associated with the behavior, either passive behavior or active behavior, acceptable behavior or a non-acceptable behavior. Then the problem is being manifested as an outcome here. All right. So like this, we have a vestibular processing dysfunction. When you are hypersensitive to movement, you are over responsive. It means you don't you have a problem like gravitational security. The parents come and tell us, "Oh, my child is finding it difficult to climb even a single step. Child is finding difficulty to climb a ladder. He always very scared of it." So that child is called hypersensitivity to vestibular movement. You see some other child, they say he is not at all scared of height. He just climbs very fast onto the top and doesn't perceive the danger. That children are called, they don't understand. So they require a lot of information to make them understand. So they are hyposensitive to vestibular processing skills. Understood? Same thing for proprioception processing problem I told you. When you give more pressure in manipulating a cup of coffee with the UT cup, you end up in crushing. When you don't have a defensive, you have a tactile defensive, you don't give adequate pressure to hold a pencil so that the handwriting gets affected there. So this is called proprioceptive processing difficulties. All right. So like this, you have an auditory dysfunction here. You go and tell your therapist, you have to call a lot of time for your child to make a response. He doesn't respond to the name call. You need to call 10 times for to make his response. That children is called auditory processing difficulties, or a auditory filtering problem will be there for the child. And again, with the gustatory, you have this oral processing issue where you have difficulty in munching, grinding, and mixing the food within the use of your tongue and taking it to the mouth. Some children, they don't allow brush to be kept inside the mouth. They are called oral defensive child. All right. And again, visual input. Again, this is a separate thing, visual input. Just I brief you what is visual processing. See, visual processing, most of our activities, as I told you, remember that diagram where you have that visual cycle, where you have a sensory input, you have a processing, and you have make a response. I told you this cycle is usually strengthened by the visual feedback mechanism. All right. So when the visual feedback mechanism doesn't work properly, then you have a problem in responding to the ongoing visual input. Example: what happens when you have a when your child is finding difficulty to read, when child is finding it difficulty to copy things from the board? We saw the problem of a visual processing skills problem that you need to differentiate. All right. So this all these sensory processing, as I mentioned you, affects your social skills, it affects your play behavior, it affects your motor skills, it affects your emotional component. All right. So with this, I like to finish off this one. I think I don't want to overload with a lot of information to you, so that I wanted you to understand at least what is sensory processing difficulties, what exactly your child is undergoing. If that part you understand, I think I'm happy for that.
Thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Indu, is that okay? Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
finishing
yeah,
with the
yeah.
point.
It was very informative, sir. And we have already have many questions what our
Yeah,
attendees
yeah,
have done. So they
yeah.
want to know about proprioception. Like just
Okay,
in a brief, can you tell them?
okay, okay. What is proprioception, right?
Yeah.
Okay, see the proprioception, as I told you, again it is a hidden sense. Unlike your visual, unlike your auditory, it is a hidden sense. So what happens in this hidden sense is you have information where your information is being taken through your bones, joint, ligaments. Through this information, the information reaches the brain. Example: when you hold a water bottle, suppose you hold a water bottle. When you hold a water bottle, you try to open the cap of this, the opener. So you give a certain amount of pressure in holding with your left hand, a certain amount of pressure to unscrew this bottle cap. All right. This is called proprioception. How did you learn to give extra pressure when you're opening the bottle? This much of pressure is not enough to unscrew the bottle. What you do, you give extra pressure to open it, because you understand the bottle is so tight, you need to give extra pressure to unscrew it. That learning is called proprioceptive processing learning, where, as I told you, it got four different skills. One is your pressure exertion, other one is your movement control, other one is your maintenance of a posture. Now you are all sitting for last 1 hour, right? So that is called proprioception skills. If you don't have proper proprioceptive skills, you have a tendency of leaning one side, you have a tendency of sleeping, you have a tendency of lying on your stomach, all these things will happen. All right.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that. You made it so easy to understand. Yeah. What are the some early symptoms in children that indicates sensory disorder? How can we interpret subtle symptoms?
Okay, so you can group in this one into two different areas. So suppose you see a child with a high risk category. So usually a child with a prematurity, or child with the low birth weight, or child with any other developmental things, they will be admitted in the NICU stage. During this NICU stage, we have something called neurobehavioral organization. So the amount of sleep, the amount of acceptance of the oral feed, multiple factors we consider, we evaluate using a scale called Brazelton Neural Behavioral Scale. It means how the child is organizing, how the neural organization happens in the brain. The neural behavioral organization is you have a multiple pathways in the brain, the neural pathways. when you are constantly disturbed if you are premature. There is constant disturbances in the NICU. Someone keeps coming, going out, light has been on, too much of noise, too much of light. So that disturbance disturbs this neurological pathway. Okay, there then the neurological pathway affects there. The behavioral, the neurobehavioral is getting affected there. How to organize this neurobehavioral is you need to understand the child. You need to present a calm environment. You need to give a soothing environment. That's the reason we tell them a mother's touch is very important when a child is growing right from the day one. We say it's a non-procedural touch. Just to change the nappy, just to feed the child, don't touch the child. Touch the child every now and then. You pass on your love and affection through your touch to the brain, to the child. The child understands your touch. The child understands someone is touching to calm me because during the psychosexual development in Eric Erikson theory, it says that trust versus mistrust happens in the first 2 years of the life. Correct?
Mhm.
Trust is
Yes.
what? You get the social security from the primary caregiver. The primary caregiver is only the mother, next to the mother, the grandmother. So this is how the system is being presented to you. And this system, when the child experiences a pleasant environment, then the neural behavioral organization happens very well, develops. So if there is a change in this one, then you can pick up the indicators. What is the indicator here? A child constantly keeps crying, child doesn't feed, and the child has a very unpleasant NICU stay. And at fifth month, the child doesn't have a social smile. It's an indicator. Your child doesn't interact with you with the babbling sounds. Then there's an indication. All these things. Not necessary. It has to be a neurological insult in a present world, everyone are busy going outside work, and we tell the maid to take care of our child. So what happens? The maid usually make the child overfeed and make the child sleep. So child is being deprived from sensory stimulation. That sensory stimulation deprivation also plays an important role where child may not learn anything.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you. That was great explanation from you. Next question is, what are all the different situations or symptoms where OT is needed?
Sorry, once again, can you repeat?
Yeah, sure. What are all the different situations or symptoms where OT is needed?
Yeah. So
I
this is
don't.
very, I know. It's like answering a 50 mark question now. So you can think about answering for a long or a separate webinar also. All right. So I'll just brief you with the 2 points. So when do
Sure.
you need an OT? When do you need, when a parent should go to OT? That's what your question, right?
Yes,
So
sir. Yes, sir.
as I was mentioning, when you see a child with a maladaptive behavior, when you see a behavior is not acceptable by the people around you, then you may take an advice of an OT to find out whether the behavior is associated with the sensory or not sensory problem, whether that is a real issue or a fake issue, or it is overlooked too much, or it is not focused much. So that way, and you can approach an OT to understand what your child may require. The first stop should be an OT for you.
Okay, okay, sir. There is another question. Does sensory processing disorder result in learning difficulties in children? Is it too late to help a child of 14 years with this? If not, what are the options we can pursue to help the child overcome these difficulties?
Yes. So this is very common thing. What happens, by 14 years, 20 years also, you all feel that okay, since it is sensory integration problem, even 20 year child also will have a problem. That's the reason I made a slide where young child also has a sensory preferences. They have a sensory problem. Even a grown-up adults in 40s, 50s also they have a sensory problem. So what makes the difference is you try to master the art of overcoming that one. Children, they don't know to overcome the situation. So they end up in stucking into the same thing and these children. For a 14-year, what happens is that we need to accept the failure of a rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is not a success every time 100%. There is a failure too. That failure, we need to accept it. So the sensory integration, occupational therapy intervention will be very effective first 3 years of life. And then up to 7 years, you can do again 80 to 85% we can work on. As the brain matures enough, as the learning completes, as the child keeps growing chronologically and mentally, it's very difficult from an occupational therapy to work on the basic principle. But you have to think what can benefit the child in terms of different things like a social behavior, emotional component to be addressed, a vocational component to be addressed. For an occasion, what all components the prerequisite you should help the child to have a proper vocational outcome. That you need to think in that way.
Okay, sir. Thanks for that. What is the meaning of lack of tolerance to listening?
Okay, that's very good because usually I keep telling everyone when during my therapy session, lack of tolerance. See, it is about the patience. So when you don't have a patience to listen, usually it happens with. I mean to make it very lighter note, husband and wife. They one person usually doesn't have a tolerance to listen to what others are saying. There, you only end up in arguing. You are not made up your mind to solve the problem. All right. So it is like that. When you see a child who has got less tolerance to listen, it means the moment you give the information, they end up in doing the work. Understood? So they are impulsive by nature. It means they have low threshold, neurological threshold. They require little information to respond. So that is called lack of listening tolerance.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. What about a child? Yeah, can it be generalized if there is a writing or learning problem because of sensory integration?
100%, 100%. What happens here, when you see a child who has a problem in handwriting, it means you need to evaluate their sensory issues. As I told you, when they don't have a proper control of their eyeball muscles, that will affect their handwriting because they have difficulty in copying from the board. They have difficulty in spacing the letters. They have difficulty in making the shape of the letter well. They have the difficulty in making the size of the letters. The shape and size of the letter may vary completely when they don't have a control. It's called
Mhm.
oculomotor disturbances.
Okay, okay, sir.
Even the learning is affected because of this ongoing sensory integration trouble.
Okay, thanks for that. How to address sensory overload in a form of continuous thoughts in older children, which results in poor
Sorry.
concentration?
One second. Yeah. One second, please go ahead.
Sure, sir. Sh- How to address sensory overload in form of continuous thoughts in older children, which results in poor concentration?
Okay, so sensory overload is what I was mentioning about. When you have a stuffed full brain, that is, your brain is completely overloaded with a lot of information. You are trying to add up some more information to the already full brain. There, the brain is with full of information. Their behavior will be more of a defensive. They fight with you or they go in a brain shutdown. So for a grown-up child, it's very difficult. You teach them new skills. What you need to do, you need to make the child calm down. You need to make the child understand. As they tell show a lot of visual cues. Prepare them. This is what I'm going to do it for tomorrow for you. You get ready for it. You get prepared for it. So that's how you need to train these children.
Okay, sir. Somebody has posted telling that they see some overlap between active and passive, and they are in a doubt that they are asking, is it possible? Active and
Overlapping? Yes,
passive.
yes, yes, yes. Sometimes what happens, not necessary that you need to show only active behavior, only a passive behavior. And some situation, morning they will show an active behavior response, suddenly in afternoon they may show a passive behavioral responses. So that keeps changing. That doesn't overlap, but it changes.
Okay, sir. Okay. So, when presented with an activity or a drawing,
Yeah.
mental planning is required for the beginning. The child
And
is clueless and waits for prompts
yeah,
as to where to start. Does this
yes.
come under sensory processing?
It comes under motor planning skills. Motor planning, because the child is not able to plan what to do. Child is finding it difficult to organize the step involved in doing the particular task.
Okay, okay, sir. Okay. So another interesting question is there any relation between IQ and sensory integration?
See, this is my experience. I tell them. So IQ doesn't have anything to do with the sensory integration. IQ can be quite normal. If IQ is normal, it doesn't mean that you don't have a sensory problem. Even a person with a good IQ will also have a sensory problem. This is for sure.
Mm.
Even we would have undergone that one. A simple thing I'll tell you, in our school days, in the college days, how many of us are able to tolerate the screech sound of the chalk piece?
Correct, sir. Very
Okay,
correct.
so
Very much.
many of us, we don't have the tolerance to accept the speech sound of the chalk piece on the board. So what we did was we overcame it. How did we overcome that one? By avoiding that place, or you don't use the chalk piece at all, or you focus on something else.
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't mean that our IQ is less. But still, even now we have an sensory problem. Even now, I don't like to touch something very wet. I don't like to go to a place where it is very wet and, messy place. I avoid going
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay, okay.
We have learned the art of overcoming it. So that is the only difference.
Okay, sir.
But
Thank you.
children with sensory problems, they don't have IQ. That is what my perception. Because they are good with their intelligence. They are good
Uh,
with their intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So there is one interesting question. One of the person has asked, his can children be hyposensitive? That means not getting affected by dangerous situation to certain circumstances, but hypersensitive to some others, like sound.
Yes,
So
yes,
he sees that in his child.
yes.
So,
Yes, you have this variation. Like you for visual sensory systems, you might be visual seekers, but for auditory, you will be auditory sensitive. That variations you have. So that is the reason we should have a proper, thorough, complete evaluation of the sensory, profile or sensory issues.
hmm. Okay, sir. Next one. What about the child doesn't like to touch the food, doesn't like to chew the food? How to overcome this problem?
Okay. So is this comes under oral defensive. When a child doesn't like to touch a food or doesn't like to keep the food into the mouth, it's called oral defensive problem. So what you need to do is that we need to do a gradual desensitization, which is a gradual oral desensitization. Okay. First, what you do instead of keeping a wet food into the mouth, try to work more on a dry food object within the mouth. First is try to desensitize the perioral cavity. Then you try to desensitize the inner oral cavity. And then you try to work on the munching skills. And then you try to work on the food particles on the tongue. So start with the dry food, semi-solid food, and then go with the messy food.
Okay. Sir, somebody is asking like some babies don't touch different foods or won't eat at all.
Mm.
So is it the same thing with the babies also or grown-ups or everyone like as you said before?
Yeah, so we need to understand what is normal and what is not normal. For the babies, these kind of things are normal. See, suppose a 20-year-old person or a 5-year-old child who's a picky eater or doesn't like to touch a certain food, or 10-year-old doesn't like to touch a certain food, then that's a problem for the 10-year-old. If the same problem is for the 1-year-old child, then it is not a problem. Okay.
Okay. Okay,
Okay, so
sir.
we need to understand this like this. If a 1-year-old child or 2-year-old child doesn't have the urine control, which is normal. If the
Mhm.
same urine control is not there for a 5-year-old child or a 4-year-old child, then it is abnormal.
Okay. Sir, they are asking what signs to look out for and how early it can be recognized by parents.
Which one? The sensory problem.
Yes, sir. Yes, sensory processing
See,
disorder.
yeah. So, see, I personally think branding is not the solution for any child. You cannot diagnose a child until unless 4 years or 5 years. That's what my understanding about this one. But still, you can be cautious about certain red flags when the child is growing, which you understand, okay, these are might be some problem. Example, when you see a child at the 5th month, if the child is not having a social smile, that is your red flag. When you see on 4th month, the child doesn't bring both hands towards the midline and take it to the mouth, then that is a red flag. If you don't see a child taking the great toe at the 5th month to the mouth, then that is a red flag. I mean, I'm combining the motor milestone as well as the cognitive milestone. If you see
Okay.
a 6 month child doesn't flip over, then that is a red flag. If you see 1 month old child flipping very continuously, that is a red flag. That is a hypotone of the muscles. All right. If
Mhm.
you see a child who is always having the scissoring pattern of the crosses the legs on each other, then that is a red flag. If you see a child at 8 months doesn't babble at all, then that is a sign of red flag. If you see a child who is not turning at the 7th month towards parent's face, then there is a red flag.
Oh, so it along with this things, muscle tone and all, this developmental milestones is also one of the reason to identify all these things, sir.
Yes,
I'm just
yes,
asking. Okay.
100%, 100%. Muscle tone, musculoskeletal tone is very important. Tone of the muscle is very important when you are seeing a child.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you so much. And another one question, sir, can we take two more or three more questions?
Yeah, please, please, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. Without reason, my child hit others. Not hard,
Okay.
but still hits. So
Hmm.
they are just seeking your help in that.
Yeah. Yeah. See, what happens here? No, you are that child. Emotionally, the child is developed. The child wants to play with the other child.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the child didn't know how to play. What is normal way of playing? So it means the social part, the social skill part is not being matured with the child. So the child expresses the child's interest or willingness to play with the other child only by pushing.
Okay.
Because pushing and pulling is the first stage to develop in the growing brain. That pushing and pulling will convert with the social learning. Come, sit and
Mm.
play. Come, let's do this one. So that
Mm.
is the subsequent stages. Since the
Mm.
child is not moved socially, child stuck down to the basic thing by only pushing and pulling. But the emotion part of the child wanted to play with the other child. So that is the reason child pushes. So we need to encourage the child to play which is acceptable in the environment in an acceptable way. Because conditioned learning you need to do.
Okay. How to address my child's sudden screaming and running in circles? It's ASD
Yeah.
child.
Okay.
So, how to address his sudden screaming and it's running in circles? The
See,
question.
yeah. So what happens here? Sudden screaming and sudden running in circles. We need to understand what is the situation. As I told you, the first slide. What is the
Mm-hmm.
intensity? What is the
Ah,
frequency? What is the duration? Which
okay.
time or where the child is doing that one? That is the general behavior. If it is the general behavior, no, or it is only to a particular situation. We need to know what is the particular situation. What makes the child to do that one? That we need to understand.
Okay.
Generally, generally, when you see a child is screaming, generally when you see a child running around, it means the child requires calming things. You need to give a tight hug to the child. You need to make the child in a pleasant environment, give them something pleasant feel, then the child might be comfortable. You need to make the child comfortable.
Okay. So there is one interesting question. They're
Yeah.
asking like the child during the tantrums,
Yeah.
after the tantrums and all, the child will follow up with the epilepsy attack.
Yeah.
So will it be so severe? And is there any like way to handle that, or like is it related to sensory processing? They are
No,
asking.
this is not related to sensory processing. See, one is
Okay.
the child is throwing the behavior temper tantrums. Suddenly, after tantrums, there is a episode of convulsion.
Epilepsy. Yeah.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it is nothing to do with the sensory processing. But when you are having a temper tantrum, it means that usually the convulsions happens when you are overstimulated, when the brain is, any substance or anything which triggers fast electrical discharges that triggers the convulsions. Example, what is the mood elevators? The mood elevators are something like this. You have an amartanjan or a Vicks which is rubbing on your forehead that has got a strong stimulant of your brain. Any stimulant of your brain triggers your epilepsy, convulsions. Temper tantrums, I'm not very much sure. Only the temper tantrums is the reason for the child to have a seizure.
Okay.
But what you need to do when the child is doing the temper tantrums, try to make the child free with all the clothings. Don't make the child wear tight pants or tight body fitting clothes and all. Or no extra stimulants which may trigger the convulsions. So try to make things calm so that once the calmness is being prevalent there, that reduces the stimulant of the brain. The stimulant when it reduces, that doesn't trigger the convulsions. If it is, if I just superficially I'm saying, you may have multiple reasons for a convulsions also.
Okay, sir. Okay. Sir, there is one question which says the child always wets himself by
Hmm.
pouring water on himself and
Okay,
drinks all kind of solutions.
okay, okay, okay.
So they are like they're not sure like how to overcome
How
that,
old,
or
how old is the child?
so they have not sent, but they have he is diagnosed with ASD. They have not sent any age here.
Okay.
He wets. Can they come online to say that who has sent that?
Sorry?
I'm asking the participants if anybody has sent that. Can they come online and say the age of the child? They have not. They have not sent the age, sir. Can we
Okay,
take it as a kid only, like below 6 or 8 or something like that? And
okay.
the
So
question is,
they
always
think,
wets himself. Yeah.
oh, the child is always wet. See,
Yeah.
the
Pouring
water
water
play.
on himself.
Yeah, see, the water play is very normal for a child with the first 3 years. Some adults also likes to do water drenching on the rain is very common. Okay, it's not a problem. But drinking the solutions, of course, the child is not perceiving the danger. The first child doesn't understand the what to drink or what not to drink. This is quite normal for first 2 years of life. After 2 years, this is something very serious about doing it. You need to evaluate and see. I don't think this is related to sensory, definitely.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Not
Uh,
related to sensory, but this is a behavior.
okay. Another interesting question. Here they say can't be in a highly lighted areas more than 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, okay.
30 minutes. Sorry, 30 minutes. He can't be in a highly lighted area more than
Hmm.
30 minutes.
So what happens? So that is a general behavior. But what happens if the child is there in that lighted environment more than 30 minutes?
He shows temper tantrums or starts crying.
Okay.
That's what they have sent. Like temper tantrums are there, then he can't. He just wants to go away from that place.
Okay. So, see, we should know if, see, superficially when you want me to tell this one, I don't think so any rational behind it. See,
Okay.
what happens usually if it is a sensory problem, what will happen? I'll give you the possible scenario.
Okay, sir.
They will be over focused with the visual things. That is,
Mm-hmm.
looking more spinning things, looking more into the bright lights. They are visual seekers. Some
Mm-hmm.
children who are doesn't sensitive, highly sensitive for the visual things will be, they prefer staying in the dark environment. They don't like to come onto the bright environment. Since you are saying it is for 30 minutes, he is able to tolerate that one. Probably he is tolerating, his tolerance level is improved good for the visual area. Okay,
Okay.
that's what I can understand. That's what I can understand.
Uh-huh.
But usually when the time limit, the stipulated time is 30 minutes, he can tolerate. After 30 minutes, he screams. I don't think the rational is there for sensory problem.
Okay, sir. So they're asking biting teeth, shaking head, sometimes staring at one place and laughing alone sometimes. Is
Okay.
it related to any of the sensory processing disorder?
See, it's a behavior. Whatever they said, it's a behavioral outcome. As I was
Hmm.
mentioning in my presentation, all the behaviors need not to be sensory. Okay, but all the sensory issues can have a behavioral problem. Self-laughing is not a sensory-related behavioral problem. It is a pure behavioral problem. It can be an attention-seeking behavior. It can be to avoid you. It can be that behavior, but it doesn't have a sensory background for it.
Mhm.
Self-laughing.
Okay, sir.
It's a
Okay. So,
behavior. It's a behavior.
mm-hmm. So poor motor coordination. So it's as you said before, it will be because of the poor
Yes.
muscle tone, or like it could be any of the comorbid condition along with the
Muscle tone.
only muscle
Muscle
tone,
tone.
sir.
Only muscle tone. So when I talk about the muscle tone is a primary culprit for, it's a musculoskeletal culprit, where it has got an effect on the sensory issues also, where it has got effect on the comorbid issues like cerebellar involvement also, the muscle
Mm-hmm.
coordination, clumsiness.
Okay.
So
One of the
if you don't have a neurological insult in your cerebellum, then there is
Mhm.
we can rule out cerebellar issues are not there. Still, the child has got a problem with the control coordination. It means that vestibular movement processing skills are not matured enough there.
Okay, okay, sir.
Like
And
that, we need to differentiate it.
okay, that's correct. Okay, thanks for that, sir. And one of the questions says here, like, my child always take out the marker and smells it.
Okay, okay,
So he is around. He's in his fourth grade. He likes to hold the
okay,
markers, and he just keeps on smelling at it. So
okay.
as much as we try to stop it, he's increasing that one.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah,
it is,
can you help
yeah,
us?
yeah. See what happens here, as I told you, everyone has a sensory problem. This is a sensory problem, even lot of adults have this. Reason is that when you talk about the marker, it is a petroleum product. Okay, it has got that alcohol kind of a thing into that smell. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So
sir, yes.
many, if you see in de-addiction centers, not only you are addicted to the liquors, some
Mm.
patients which I have come across was they used to drink lot of this crocin. They used to iodex. You know, this iodex is a pain bomb.
Yes,
They
yes.
used to
I have heard of
they,
spirit also, sir. They drink
yeah,
spirit
spirit, yes.
also. Yeah.
They used to take this iodex and use it over the bread and they eat it. So that is an
Mm.
addiction. And some have the habit of school children. They have the habit of smelling this whiteness, thickness.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
These are all the only here is that they get the pleasure through their olfactory sensory system, which calms their higher center, which calms their central nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Sir, there is an interesting question here. They are asking, like, then can
Uh,
how can we differentiate between the sensory processing disorder, as you said, the oro
yeah.
olfactory, and this one, along with OCD?
Okay. Okay. See, OCD, when you see OCD, it has got like, washers, checkers, and they keep repeatedly washing their hands. Correct. You have
Yes.
an obsessive thoughts and a compulsive motor behavior. Correct. That's called OCD.
Okay.
So whereas in sensory problem, there is nothing related to the obsessive thought. There is no obsessive thought there. There is only the problem for them is either they have a problem in understanding or organizing or making an action plan. So their thought is not a problem here.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
they have a problem in the thought of understanding the thought or understanding the organizing the inputs.
Okay, 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 sir. Fine. So there is a question asking, like,
Yeah.
is dyspraxia affects learning in spite of good intelligence?
So dyspraxia is what difficulty in doing in motor planning, no?
Yes.
So motor planning example, you know to prepare a coffee, but you don't know to prepare a coffee for 10 members.
Okay, quantity wise.
Yes, quantity wise, organizing wise, how much sugar you need to add, how much tea powder you need to add, how much water you need to mix. You don't have this idea. So it is nothing
Mm-hmm.
related to the IQ. You don't know how to plan it, or you end up in messy things. You are clumsy like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sir. Sir, this is my personal question.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had one of the child who was 6 years of old.
yeah.
I don't know. He was like he was going to washrooms, and he was so obsessed to touch the commodes. He
Okay,
was
okay.
so obsessed to touch the commodes, even after so many repetitions, even after so many
Okay.
prompts, and taking him along with us and all. He used
Uh,
to do that. So we were
okay.
not sure, like, what was the issue
Mm,
with the child. We thought maybe that water sound he may be like,
yeah,
but
uh,
we couldn't address that thing. It
okay.
was my personal experience.
Touching only the commode has nothing to do with the sound. Yeah, probably it might be the sound also. If it is the sound of that flush sound of the commode, it would have given him the unpleasant experience, right?
Huh.
So that might also be one reason the child is avoiding it. So you need to do a gradual exposure. Probably some children take a lot of time. Some children take a very brief time to do this one. So only option left with this is to do lot of gradual exposure to the particular thing.
So it's not a vestibular processing like
No,
whatever.
no,
Oh,
not a vestibular, not a vestibular.
Not a vestibular one. Okay,
Not a
sir.
vestibular.
Thank you so much. Any other
Yeah,
questions, please? Uh, 1 second, sir. Yeah.
yeah.
Behaviors like biting, hitting only with mom.
So it is a pure behavior, nothing to do with the sensory, because they know how to handle the mother and they take mother for granted. So you need to be
Okay.
very firm. You need to be very firm with the child. You need to
Okay.
use lot of timeout techniques with the child. Then it will work.
Okay. Poking the corner of eyes and squeezing eyes is visual dysfunction. And how to
Yes,
address it?
it's a visual
Unable.
seeking.
Yeah.
It's
Visual.
a proprioception. It's a visual proprioception seeking behavior. So
Okay,
it
sir.
means the child has a difficulty in controlling the oculomotor muscles. You need to work a lot on visual motor activities or a visual perceptual activities.
Okay. Unable to do light coloring by giving less pressure. How
Yes.
to teach this? The pressure while doing coloring or anything like that.
You mean that child is not giving adequate pressure?
Yes, that's what the
Okay.
question means for me. Vasumati, can you please come on mic and explain that to sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Sure.
Hello. Can you hear?
Yes,
Yeah.
Vasumati.
Yeah. He applies, my son applies dark color. So, because he gives enough pressure. But when we're teaching him to do it light coloring, he's not able to control that pressure in the fingers. He just does
Okay. Okay.
dark coloring.
Okay, so it is like this. What happens? You are saying that he is giving too much of pressure to color it. He is
Yes.
not understanding the light thing. So the
Yes.
answer is not giving him the light color to do it, or the answer is not to tell him do it slowly, do it light. He won't understand. So what you need to do is that change the writing tool. Instead of giving the crayon, try to work on the paint brush. Instead of
Yeah.
paint brush, you grade it. Gradually, you need to grade from pencil to a lighter writing tool. You can give a
Yeah.
cotton swab.
Yeah. We have
Sorry?
tried that. We have discarded crayons and started with pencil. The same difficulty lies in all the mediums.
No,
So
no.
he's not able to.
You need to grade gradually. If it is a crayon, next down to the crayon is the pencil. Down to the pencil is a chalk piece. Down to pencil is a paint brush. Down to paint brush you have cotton swabs. Cotton swabs you have something called a cloth where he doesn't have enough pressure to do it. So ask him to hold only with the two fingers and do things. Instead of doing it on a paper, ask him to do it on an inclined surface. Ask him to do it on a plywood surface. There he may not, or ask him to do it on a plastic ball. Ask him to do it on a painting or writing on a cotton swabs. So you keep changing the writing tool as well as the writing material. So when you give lot of variabilities to do a particular writing, then the amount of pressure might you will learn to vary it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hope you got the answer, Vasumati.
Thank
Sir,
you.
here
Thank you,
is
sir.
one. Okay. One more thing is like hand flapping and humming. 15-year old ASD.
Okay. See, 15 years I was telling you, the occupational therapy, unfortunately, the sensory integration, all these things. So after 10 years, it might not be that effective as what everyone thinks. If I tell you, okay, for 15-year-old child, okay, come to occupational therapy, I can address you all your sensory integration, I'll do and make you all right. So I'm trying to cheat you, that is giving you the false hope. So that might not happen. So what you need to do is that for a 15-year-old boy with the hand flapping, try to do lot of physical gross motor activity. Like you encourage him to do volleyball, you encourage him to do a basketball, encourage him to play with the badminton, you encourage him to do lot of bilateral activities like a typing, all these things you need to involve in. You need to integrate the child into a functional task rather working on a therapeutic activities.
Okay, that was so informative. Thank you, sir. Sir, one last question.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry for
No, no,
extending your
no,
time.
no.
Some people are very intolerant to hold banana or tamarind. Does this come under sensory issue?
No. Okay. I read someone message it. So what is the problem in holding the banana? Whether if the skin is being peeled, holding the raw banana or holding with the skin. What is the problem there?
They have not told anything. Can you please come on the mic and explain it to sir? whoever has posted that one, holding even with skin. They are
Holding
messaging,
it
sir.
with skin.
Yeah, holding
Even
even with
holding with the skin.
skin. Yeah.
Okay, 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 okay. It is a raw banana or something very more fruit one, or it's very fluffy thing.
Ripe
Yes, sir.
one.
Yeah, the regular banana, sir. The one which we eat. I mean, not the plantain, but the regular
The
banana.
the harder one,
Not
or
the
the
regular
small,
banana
soft one,
what
the
we
soft
eat.
one,
Yeah, the soft one, I
soft
would say.
one.
Yeah.
So tamarind and banana only is not holding it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, he's finding it difficulty to touch, or he's finding difficult, doesn't want to hold it.
Doesn't want to hold, doesn't want to even touch also. Basically, when we cut and give, probably the banana they eat with a spoon, but to
Okay.
touch it is a problem. And even same
Okay.
holds good with tamarind. I mean, they eat the tamarind, not like that, like in sambar and
Okay.
all, happy to eat, but not to touch
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Okay.
See, yeah, so it's a tactile defensive issue. What I understand from what you're saying, tactile defensive. If it applies, does he tolerate doing a messy activities, any sponge cakes?
Yes,
Is he able
sir.
to hold it? He
Yes, sir.
doesn't have
All that
problem with that.
yes, yes. Paints and other things are fine, especially only with these two things.
Okay. So you tried anything after peeling off the skin? Did he give that one banana
Yes, if we cut and give it in a bowl and ask them to eat, yes, happy to eat.
with the hands? He's
No, no,
eating.
with the spoon.
Okay. So does he touch the grapes, something like grapes, fruits,
Yes,
or
yes, sir. Watermelon, grapes, everything else is fine. Apple.
they're able to touch everything?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So very difficult question now because see the texture of the grapes and the watermelon and other things are all almost coincides
Same.
with the texture of the
Mhm.
apple. So if they are able
Okay.
to touch all these things, not only with banana, I think the problem with might be with the shape or something. I'm not really able to
Okay, maybe could be
completely
just
give
the
you the answer.
behavior aspect then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think we
I'm
can
not able
get
to.
back to sir. We
Sure,
will,
sure, sure.
yeah, we will send his mail ID, or you can get in touch with
Yes,
him. Yeah,
sure, sure.
sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so
I'm,
much.
I'm I'm sorry for that question, which I'm not able to
Sir,
answer it.
no, sorry,
No,
please.
sorry, sir. Please, no, no, no.
Yeah,
It's quite
Uh,
informative.
because it
Thank
is.
you. It was some random. I mean, some things just doesn't come up the answer. I'll get back to you, sir. Thank you, Indu, ma'am. Thank you.
sure,
Yeah,
sure, sure.
that's nice. Sir, thank you. It
Yeah,
was a wonderful session, and Embrace
thank
team
you.
is happy that you lent
Okay.
your time, valuable time, and thought with us, and it was an enormous learning for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, all the
Thank you.
participants who have attended. Hope we all had a great learning. Thank you, one and all, again. Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, doctor.